Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Libraries as Cooling Centers. We're so glad to have you with us. Before we get started, I just want to mention a few housekeeping notes to make sure everything runs smoothly. If everyone could please keep your microphone muted during the presentation to avoid any interruptions. And we kindly ask that you remain respectful to our presenters and fellow attendees throughout the session. And a recording of today's webinar will be shared with everyone who registered along with the presentation slides. We'll also be posting that on the SLI website. So you'll be able to review everything, afterwards. So now it's my pleasure to turn things over and introduce our first speaker, Jared Ulmer. Jared is from the Climate and Health Program Manager at the Vermont Department of Health. Jared will provide an overview of the risks of extreme heat, who is vulnerable, how libraries can support heat safety, and common challenges that libraries face. Jared, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thanks everyone for being here today. Let me get my slide sharing. All right, Alex, can you confirm you can see my full screen slides? Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you. All right, so yeah, thank you for the introduction. As Alex said, I manage the Climate and Health Program at the Department of Health in Vermont. And we've been working with communities around the state for a number of years and trying to encourage the identification and sharing of information about more sites that people can use in their communities during extreme heat, knowing that we have very little air conditioning in Vermont, among other risk factors. So I'm going to bring you some information from the work that we've been doing in Vermont. I am going to try to generalize a little bit more, knowing that we have folks from across the country joining today. But some of the examples I'll give may be more Vermont specific. So just wanted to acknowledge that some of the information I have to share might be, most relevant for cooler climate states and more rural communities. And then I'm hoping that Laura in the second presentation can help provide some balance with more of a warmer climate and more urban perspective. All right, so I'm going to jump in. Hopefully this is not really new news, but it's getting hotter. We've seen over the course of the last century both daytime and nighttime temperatures increasing. This slide shows some data from the EPA showing the top 10% of hot nights and hot days in different communities across the country. And unsurprisingly, we see more and more of those in the recent years. The red line is daytime temperatures and the orange line is nighttime temperatures. And I just wanted to point out from this that it's something we don't always think about, is that it's not just the extreme highs in the day that are increasing, but overnight warm temperatures are increasing. And that's, particularly concerning for states like Vermont or others that don't have high rates of air conditioning. We really rely on those cool nighttime temperatures to cool down our homes and businesses and other buildings, and that's happening less and less, and so that's creating a challenge for a lot of folks. Similarly, we're seeing steep increases in recent years in the number of heat-related deaths. This is data from the CDC I'm showing here, where for a number of years, the number of deaths related to heat held steady between maybe 500 and 1,000 across the country, but we've seen that go up into the 1 and 2,000s in recent years. Heat-related deaths are obviously a significant concerning impact, but to expand a little bit further, we also are seeing a really steep increase in heat-related emergency department visits. Those have also gone up from about 70,000 per year across the country in recent years to 120,000 in the most recent year of data in 2023. So we're seeing a lot of impact already from that increasing heat, and we know from published studies that these heat-related impacts are really underreported. A lot of times people are going to the ED or maybe dying due to other causes, heart, cardiovascular, respiratory. Um, these are all conditions that are made worse by heat, and it's not always recorded as heat on a death certificate or in a hospital record. So we expect that this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg that we're seeing in these data. But bottom line is we're seeing a lot more impact in recent years. Into the future, we are expecting to see more and more hot days and hot nights. So this is some additional data from our national climate assessment, which was just updated in the last few years, showing the number of the expected increase in the number of days over 95 degrees across the country. And this is for a scenario where global warming reaches an increase in 3 degrees Celsius, which is kind of a middle of the road scenario by the end of this century. And so we can see the number of 95 plus days increasing by, more than 60 in the deep south per year. Further north in Burlington, for example, we're only seeing about 8 is the projected increase, which is better than plus 60, but we almost have 0 right now. It's very rare to get a 95 plus day here. So 8 more is actually kind of alarming for a climate like we have in Vermont. Apologies to anyone joining from Alaska, which is apparently not in this data set. Hawaii and Puerto Rico are both off the map. If you're interested in those, I have those data I can share. But I'm gonna move to the projections for warm nights. These are nights over 70 degrees. See similar trends, maybe a little bit more concentrated in the deep south with projections of more than 75 days that are staying above 70 degrees into the future. This is compared to what was the average from 1991 to 2020, so it's kind of a recent average. So all of this kind of adds up to an expectation, according to some studies I've seen, that we'll see a 5 to 7 times increase in the number of heat-related deaths just by 2050. And that range is, depending on how fast warming takes place. Do we accelerate mitigation of climate impacts? So I think regardless of how quickly we work to solving this global problem, we expect to see much more impact, which is fueling our need to act urgently on this problem. Just wanted to talk a little bit about what heat illnesses actually are, and in very, very oversimplified terms, it's basically whenever the heat exposure overpowers a person's ability to cool off. And kind of 2 main ways that we cool off. One is by blood flowing outwards from our organs to our skin surface, and that helps kind of radiate heat from our body. It's very effective, but that also puts internal organs under a lot of pressure. So that's why we see a lot of exacerbation of underlying health impacts during extreme heat. The other is sweating. Whenever you sweat, that sweat evaporates, and that helps cool your body. Another reason why exposure to heat in places with a lot of humidity is problematic, because when the air is already saturated with water, it makes our body's ability to sweat less effective. So we have to think about not just temperature, but humidity when we're thinking about how people are affected by heat. And there's kind of a range of different of heat-related health impacts. The 2 that we probably talked the most about are heat exhaustion, which is when you really start to feel fatigued, maybe a little lightheaded, maybe feel a bit nauseous, and these are sort of concerning, but the types of symptoms that you can address pretty quickly if you stop your exertional activity, get to somewhere that's cooler, or at least in the shade, drink some water, rest. Heat exhaustion is usually something that you can recover from pretty quickly. If heat exhaustion continues on for a while, it can lead to heat stroke, which is much more serious. You can pass out. You feel much more nauseous. You may actually even stop sweating. So that's a much more serious condition. If anybody's ever experiencing the symptoms that you see on the side of this slide with heat stroke, that's an emergency. You want to call 911 and do anything that you can in the place where the person is to help cool them off as quickly as possible while waiting for help to arrive. Not everyone is affected in the same way by heat. This slide kind of shows some different categories of vulnerability that we talk about with heat impacts. Some people are more exposed to hot conditions, like outdoor workers, people that are unhoused, and people living in urban areas. Some people's bodies are just more sensitive to heat exposure. That could be anyone that's not acclimated to hot weather, and we see that a lot with, even otherwise perfectly healthy adults early in the heat season when people aren't quite as acclimated to the hot conditions. Once it gets to July, August, our bodies can deal with the heat a lot better, but at least in Vermont in April, May, June, the first heat of the year tends to hit everybody hard. Otherwise, older adults and young children kind of have less ability to regulate their temperature as most adults do. People that are pregnant, overweight, or have some kind of chronic medical condition or using certain drugs, alcohol and prescription medications can put people at higher risk. And then if you don't have the adaptation resources that you need, that reduces your ability to manage these risks. So if you live alone, or if you can't get to a community cooling site, or you can't keep your home cool, these are when some of those risk factors can turn into an emergency if you're not able to get the relief that you need during hot conditions. I want to share an example that really shows some of these overlapping risk factors, at least in a northern climate. In the northwestern US and Western Canada in 2021, there was a heat dome that killed over 1,000 people. There was some really rich data provided by the coroner's office in British Columbia on, I think it's 621 people that died in British Columbia during this heat wave. And they found that the chart shows the age ranges. And so you can see it's, predominantly older adults. But what was so alarming to me is that 98% of those deaths occurred inside a person's residence. Often we think about, outdoor workers and people running marathons and outdoor exertion, and like that's real. That happens a lot, particularly in the hotter climates. In the northern climates, I think what we're increasingly seeing, and we see in Vermont as well, is that the most severe impacts are really focused on people's place of residence, largely because of the lack of air conditioning in a lot of homes. And a lot of the folks that died during this heat wave also lived alone, and you can see that very few of them were using air conditioning at the time. Just to give you a little bit of data about air conditioning across the country, the states with the least air conditioning are on the right. You can see Vermont's in there, and fifth from the least air conditioning. So a big concern for us. I was talking about Washington and Oregon with that heat wave. They're both in that top 10. So, these are the places that are probably going to be struggling the most with the changing conditions, just because the infrastructure is not there to manage it. Whereas in a lot of southern states that are used to the heat at least have better developed infrastructure and systems for managing extreme heat. I also wanted to mention houselessness, another one that I think is is very obvious and a day-to-day, issue that a lot of communities are dealing with in more, urban communities. But we even see in Vermont, we're learning more and more about impacts on unhoused folks during our increasingly warming summers. And we've had an opportunity in the last couple of years to collect some some information both from service providers and from unhoused folks as well about impacts during the heat. One thing I do want to say is that one we've learned that there's just widespread gratitude amongst the unhoused population for the ability to come into libraries to find relief on hot days. We heard that throughout many interviews, but we also heard some stories like the service provider told us about somebody who, kept getting kicked out of all the different places that they were trying to find relief during a heat wave and ended up passing away. So this is something that is kind of a newer challenge for us in Vermont, and I wanted to flag because there's a lot of work we need to do to help support this population during extreme heat. All right, with that, what can libraries do? Why you all are here today? I want to talk about a couple of different strategies. Mostly I'm going to focus on cooling sites, but I wanted to mention a few other strategies that you all could be thinking about. So the first strategy is to promote yourself as a community cooling site. These I'll give some definitions of these, but places where people can go to get out of the heat. And they're especially helpful for people that either don't have air conditioning at their home or that are exposed to really hot conditions outside because they're unhoused, they work outdoors, or for some other reason they're just exposed to hot conditions. And there's no real formal definition, at least in Vermont. There may be in other states of what a cooling site is. It's kind of something that we self-identify in Vermont, at least. But they tend to be places that are either air conditioned or can be kept naturally cool and are open to the public. There can be, private buildings, businesses are often cited as potential places for cooling as well. So if you have places like that, you can go in your community, that's great. But we're mostly focused on encouraging sort of the open to the public types of buildings to identify themselves as cooling facilities and support that in their community. So there's a couple different types of cooling sites that we talk about in Vermont. This is our typology. As I said, there's nothing really formal about this. It's self-identified, but we talk about cool places, which that could be a library that has air conditioning and is just open under normal scheduled hours. Like you don't have to do anything extra to be a cool place. It's just letting people know that your facility has air conditioning. Cooling centers we tend to talk about as a cool place that offers something additional, either additional hours or amenities, services, something that specifically helps support people during hot weather, providing water, providing health or social service check-ins, those sort of things. So that's sort of like a cool place with some specific strategies to address heat safety. Cooling shelters. Shelter means it has overnight accommodations. And then we also talk about outdoor cooling sites. That's one strategy, even if you don't have a building that can be kept cool, but you have, great outdoor shaded area, that could be used as a cooling site during hot weather. I probably won't go through all of these. I think these slides are going to get shared later, but we do communicate some minimum encouraged amenities for cooling sites. Again, nobody's going to say you can't be one if you don't have all of these. But in general, we want cooling sites to be air conditioned, free and open to the public, welcoming, have access to basic needs like restrooms, water, places to sit, and make sure that it's widely advertised. And then there are the sort of extra things that are great if facilities can do them. Many can't, and that's okay. But getting transportation access to cooling sites is sometimes challenging. So any way to support transportation, providing activities for guests, that's usually pretty easy for a library. If there are separate rooms that you can help set people up in that are there, predominantly for the cooling and maybe not to use the library services, it's great if you're able to, provide some separation. Um, Pets, this is a big challenge with people going to any kind of shelter or emergency center is if they can't bring their pets, they might not come. So if there's any way to accommodate pets, that opens the doors for a lot more people. Um, any ways to extend hours or open on days that you wouldn't normally be open. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of these, but um, in some cases, it could be really important to be able to have, staff there that are trained and prepared to support the health and social needs of people using the cooling facility. Um, This is very Vermont specific, but when we talk to places that may want to advertise themselves as a cooling site, we talk about basically planning around when the National Weather Service issues a heat advisory, which is at a heat index of 95 or above in Vermont. There are other cases where you might want to activate your site or advertise your site at a lower temperature, like the first the first really hot stretch of weather of the year almost always tends to be the most impactful on people. So if in Vermont, if we had a period of 90s in May, that's going to hit people pretty hard, and we would really be encouraging cooling sites to open, even if the Weather Service didn't issue a heat advisory. So you should be able to find standards for your community on your local Weather Service website because these thresholds for issuing heat advisories and heat warnings vary depending on the climate. Um, Very important thing is just make sure people know that you're open. Um, there are a lot of different ways that in Vermont communities communicate information about cooling sites. If you have any formal system for reporting a site opening, please do that to an emergency management director, for example, or we have a cooling sites map on our health department website. So we ask libraries to let us know if they're activating for cooling, and we'll reflect that on our cooling sites map. But otherwise, you all probably know best the different communication channels that work in your community, whether that's social media or newsletters. But trying to get the word out to the public, trying to get the word out to community partners that either um, interact with folks that would benefit from coming to the cooling center, or perhaps community partners that can help support service provision at the cooling center. And then, physical signs always help. We also have some different emergency alert systems that we use in Vermont that communities can get these site openings out broadly to the public through. I wanted to flag a couple of issues that have come up in Vermont. I know I don't necessarily have all of the solutions for these, but we'll throw out a couple of strategies that we're aware of and would really love to hear from folks if you have ideas of addressing these. But we know it can be a real challenge to be, as welcoming as possible to anybody who needs the cooling site, meet needs that they may have that may not be things that the library is prepared to support or that the staff may not be prepared to support, and minimize impacts on people there just to use the library in more conventional ways at the same time. So I know that some communities have addressed this through specific training for library staff. Some have hired or at least partnered to have somebody with specific training on site to support cooling site visitors that have specific health or social needs. At least knowing who to call or where to refer people if certain issues arise. And I mentioned space separation as much as possible, so you can try to accommodate multiple needs at the same time. The other is staffing. This has come up a lot in Vermont. If a community is wanting to open for extra hours, that can be really challenging on a day that the library is normally closed, or just extending hours into the evening. Um, we know that some communities have actually allocated budget to provide a certain amount of emergency staffing at some libraries. There's also medical reserve corps in many communities across the country. They sometimes provide volunteer staffing in Vermont, or there may be other local volunteer organizations that can be tapped into. And I probably won't spend time here. I'm happy to circle back on this if this is relevant for folks, but there are, at least in Vermont, a lot of libraries that don't have air conditioning and still want to be able to support their community in some way. And so we have different strategies for keeping a building from heating up, even if you can't cool it back down. Like you could with air conditioning. Anything you can do to block out the sun, run a dehumidifier, cool it off overnight if possible. Anything that you can do to keep the heat from getting inside the building and then ventilating it out when it ends up being cooler outside. So anything you can do to keep the building from cooling up is helpful. And then longer term, there have been some programs in Vermont, perhaps in other states, to support improving building weatherization. Again, that just helps keep the heat out when it's extremely hot outside. Any other sort of facility modifications you can make to cover the roof, cover windows with trees or other ways of providing shade. If you can install heat pumps or cooling equipment, that's really the most effective thing. But there may be, some other ways through shade and insulation and ventilation that you can keep a building from heating up too much. I just wanted to quickly close with just a couple of other strategies to be thinking about whether you open as a cooling site or not. Libraries obviously are amazing sources of information. So whatever information you can provide on site in terms of handouts, QR codes, any kind of information about heat safety can be really helpful. We have a lot of translated information available on our website. If you don't in your community, you're welcome to grab translated materials from our website. I have links throughout this presentation that you can reference. And then another way is to encourage people to sign up for emergency alert systems. We have a great system in Vermont called BT Alert that sends out emergency messaging about heat and cooling sites, but only about 10 to 15% of the population subscribes. So the more, we can get to sign up is really impactful. The third thing I wanted to mention is the library could play a role in checking in on community members at high risk. Many of you may have awareness or relationships with folks that would be particularly affected by heat. Can you give them a call, especially if they're like a regular patron, they don't come in. We have some safety guidance for caregivers on our website. Again, something that you all can use, feel free to use if you want. But whether it's the library doing it or coordinating with other community partners, anything you can do to kind of check in on folks that don't have air conditioning and make sure they're staying hydrated, staying safe at home, or to help enroll them in emergency registries. This is an emergency registry in Vermont, and many states have something similar. And the last is just to think about how the library fits in with larger community emergency planning. Hopefully the library's not just doing this in isolation. Hopefully this is part of a larger community strategy to supporting heat safety and cooling. Many communities have an emergency management director or some other sort of municipal staff that I'd encourage you to reach out to if you haven't already and try to figure out how you can plan in conjunction with the community. All right, I'm gonna stop there and stop sharing and hand it back to Alex.
Thank you so much, Jared. There's a lot of helpful information and strategies on what we can do as libraries, to help our community members and as cooling centers. Thank you so much. Once again, the slides and everything will be shared following the presentation. I do see a question in the chat. We were gonna hold off on the questions until the end, but maybe we could just take this one. Jared, do do you have any good resources for public libraries to acquire box fans to give out to residents? Um, Rita is in North Carolina. It was a very hot summer, and they only get, I guess, 5 from their health department. Do you have any suggestions on that?
I wouldn't know how to direct you in Vermont. Unfortunately, I think I do have a contact in North Carolina. I have a counterpart that does my similar job in North Carolina. I'd be happy to share their contact info with you to see if they're aware of any local resources. I have some vague recollection, and maybe Margaret remembers this, that there was a point in time where libraries could request some resources that might address this. Is that ringing any bells, Margaret?
Excuse me. Not particular. I mean, it sort of does. So let me think on it while
Okay.
Laura does her presentation, and maybe we'll come up with something by the end.
Yeah, I'll dig and see if I can find that. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you both. And thank you, Rita, for your questions. Again, we'll take some more questions at the end of the presentation. So for now, we are going to. I'd like to introduce our second speaker. We have Laura Smith. Laura is a collection development librarian at the Harris County Public Library in Houston, Texas. Laura is going to share from the library perspective, highlighting practical ways that libraries can respond to our community's needs during heat events. Laura, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I'll share my screen here real quick. Okay. All right. Hoping y'all can see that now.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So, as Alex said, I'm with Harris County Public Library. I'm a collection development librarian, and then I've got the unofficial title of sustainability team lead because I'm the one who's kind of working our way through the sustainable library certification program. So I get to do both things. So we've got a lot of experience serving in this capacity in different types of scenarios, which I'll get into a little bit more as we go on. But first, a little bit of information about Harris County. We're on the Texas Gulf Coast. We were in all those horrible worst case scenarios that Jared just shared. That's us. And so we're 1,700 plus square miles. We're the third most populous county in the nation. And we've historically dealt with hurricanes, but over recent decades, we've been increasingly impacted by extreme weather in the form of, stronger hurricanes, drought, major flooding events, and even more recently, we've dealt with a couple of winter storms, which would probably make those of you in the Northeast and other areas that are more used to winter laugh when you see the pictures that I share. But just know we don't have the infrastructure for it. So it is kind of interesting as we navigate that. So this is us. We do like to be very highly rated, but not on the risk index and the social vulnerability index and the expected annual loss. And then our community resilience is very low. So that's part of one of our goals is to help make our community resilience stronger as we work with the county to implement some of the things that I'll talk about later. So, so first I'll talk about our experience serving as a cooling site, kind of as Jared was describing. We work closely with our Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and they're the ones who kind of monitor the risk index and the temperatures and all of that and decide when the sites are going to be located. And within the county itself, they've identified a combination of community centers and libraries. And then they're also looking at sites that have been identified by the city of Houston and other cities within the county, as well as nonprofits and churches and things like that who have made their buildings open. And so they've tried to keep it spread out to where it's accessible to as many people as possible because we do not have great public transportation here, especially if you are outside, even if you're within the city of Houston limits, but you're out in the suburbs and you're not in the more central part. It's not great. Park and ride is about as good as it gets in the suburbs. And so that is something that they really have to take into consideration, is whether people can actually get to a cooling site, especially if they don't have access to a vehicle. So our library leadership work closely with the Homeland Security Emergency Management folks to decide which branches, and it has changed over the years. We've shifted which branches are open. The emergency management team, they monitor the temperatures, and then they activate us as occasionally warming, but most often cooling centers when the extreme temperatures are expected. And then the library leadership activate the staff, and they have signed up in advance for coverage. We have a library emergency plan, and it has guidelines in it for everything from dealing with setting up as a cooling site, because often we'll have staff come from a branch that is not open as a cooling site to cover a cooling site. So they're going to have to know who they can reach out to get codes to turn off the alarms and keys to get into the building and that sort of thing. So we've got that outlined in the emergency plan, and that covers, all kinds of things: preparing for storms, gas leaks, chemical plant incidents, all that. Then we publicize it. We ourselves publicize it via signs in the library. Sometimes on our social media. The Ready Harris is the outreach kind of public facing voice of the county's emergency management team. And so that's the one when, Jared mentioned the Department of Health in Vermont's alerts. Ready Harris is who sends out alerts about all kinds of incidents in the county. And so that's who we ask people to follow for that information. And so they'll publicize when we're open as community centers, as well as sending it out to local news outlets. And the way that practically looks for us is that we're most often extending our evening hours until 8 o'clock on Monday through Thursday, or 7 o'clock on Friday and Saturday, which is about an extra hour for most branches. And then we also open up on Sundays from 1 to 7, and we're not normally open on Sundays. So that's where the advanced sign up comes into play. That's what we go in and lay out all the weeks throughout the summer, or the time frame that we would potentially be activated, and have staff sign up for those time slots. And then on Sundays, because we don't have a lot of staff that we can take away from their regular weekly schedules, it's kind of a tightrope it's a balancing act, I guess is what I'm trying to get out, navigating, because when you have people come in and work on a Sunday when they don't normally work, the way ours works is you get comp time hours, and usually they try to have people to have that time off during the following week, and that can get tricky because that's what we do with Saturdays as well. So in order to have the fewest people possible working in those branches on Sundays, we only open up our lobbies and meeting rooms. So that's usually, they'll come in the front entrance, and then there's another entrance that we keep locked that goes into the main part of the library. So that gives access to water fountains and bathrooms and tables and chairs and Wi-Fi and all of that. And then sometimes they'll often set out things, games, coloring sheets, all that stuff to keep people entertained. One of our branch staff shared that, when Jared mentioned pets, most of our buildings do have a policy where only service animals are allowed. But I have heard of incidents where people are aware of regulars coming in with their pets, and they'll be in like a carrier and very quiet and well behaved and not causing any issues, and they usually just ignore it because they know how challenging it is for people who are worried about their pets. So I think that varies probably from branch to branch and staff to staff. Okay. Oh, whoops. Can you still see, or did I accidentally exit out?
No, we
Okay,
can still see
I'm
it.
still, okay, good. Accidentally clicked on a weird thing. I was trying to advance. Okay. So the summer of 2023 was particularly brutal. And so at the end of that, we were actually recognized by the Emergency Management Department for the branches that kept their doors open that summer to keep everyone cool. And they gave an award to our director there. And he, pointed out that, if we didn't have staff who were willing to sign up and come in and cover those times, it would be really hard. And so when he was thanking all the staff who stepped up and signed up because they care about making sure that people aren't suffering out in the heat. Usually for us, like for example, we're all getting very excited right now because I think tonight will be the first night in months that our overnight temperatures will be below 70 and it'll be 69, and that's very exciting. So even though it has been consistently over 70, and when you mentioned the overnight temperatures, that is something that has been highlighted a lot lately by one of the popular weather resources down here, that's been a problem. And so even with it being over 70, by the time it hits around 7 or 8 o'clock and it's starting to get darker outside, it at least gets out of that danger zone. We do have the combination of the heat and the humidity, which makes it a little bit more miserable. You can go outside and walk at 5 o'clock in the morning when the sun isn't up and still come in all sweaty and needing a shower. I speak from experience this morning. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the people are dealing with. But it's at least if you're just kind of sitting there, it's at least a little bit more bearable. So the other way that we've got a lot of experience in dealing with being a cooling center is actually when we're dealing with our major weather events, because they so often affect our power grid. And so that is another way that we've gained some experience. So we have probably the most experience because we've been doing this for a long time. So these are some of our most recent, I'm trying to get my cursor over here so I can scroll. These are some of our most recent major weather events. So Hurricane Harvey in 2017, August of 2017, and that picture is from one of our branches that flooded during 2017. We had 4 that flooded. The last one just reopened this year, so 7 years later. And that's probably the biggest one where we really started taking a look at how we practically deal with all of these things. But in all the incidents, we've been there in the aftermath. And at least one of our branches served as a warming shelter during Winter Storm Uri, which I'll talk about a little bit because we haven't really served as a shelter outside of that experience. So this is where you get to laugh if you're from a place that experiences winter more than we do. I'm sure this would just be another day for you if you see this snow and ice. But Winter Storm Uri, some of you may remember that one. That's where the whole Texas grid pretty much went down, unless you were in El Paso, those lucky people who share power with New Mexico. And they were trying to mitigate the effects by rolling blackouts that wound up not being quite so rolly. So that did cause a lot of problems, even in the parts of the states that are a little bit more used to dealing with winter than we are on the Gulf Coast. So Harris County is divided into 4 precincts, and this is our Barber Bush at Cypress Creek branch, and it's in the northwestern part of the county in the precinct 4. And during that winter storm in 2021, your Winter Storm Uri, they served as a shelter, an overnight shelter. And so this is some of our staff. The gentleman in the middle with the bandana is the person who was the commissioner for that precinct at the time. To the left of him is John, one of our library staff, and to the right of him is somebody who I have been told works in our public health department. And so we had a variety of volunteers from different departments within the county who showed up to work that shelter. They brought in FEMA cots, bottled water, MREs. They had to set up because, as you can see from the masks they're wearing, we were, and it's February 2021, we're still dealing with COVID. So they had to designate out spaces for COVID positive and COVID symptomatic people. And so I talked to John a little bit about his experience in doing that because it's such a rare thing for us to do. And he said it was kind of weird. None of them really had a lot of practical experience in working an emergency type situation. And so there wasn't really a super clear chain of command. So when the power went out for about 30 minutes at midnight, it set off an alarm that nobody could get to turn off even when the power came back on, and nobody knew what to do if the power were to stay off. And so it came back on after about 30 minutes, and then it went out again completely at 4 a.m. And they'd only had about 3 people come in. I think at the beginning, it was one unhoused person who came in, and they got him set up on a cot, and he was there for the longest. And because in that area at the time, most of the people still had power at that point. And then when the grid started failing, the power went out completely at 4 a.m. and then it just got colder and colder. Our buildings tend to be, if there's any design thought put into them at all, it's usually in keeping them cool and not keeping them warm. And so it started to get colder and colder, and they were trying to decide, who do we contact to get these people moved to a place that maybe has a generator or that sort of thing. So that finally all got worked out. And as they were starting to get those plans in place, 2 more people showed up. One of them was COVID positive, and one of them was an older gentleman who slipped and injured himself on the way inside. So they had to deal with getting them medical care. So it was a learning experience for us, but we haven't served as a shelter again yet. So post-weather event recovery is where we have more experience. Our branch administrative services department is kind of the point of contact for staff, and they work with the director who kind of coordinates with the county. So Harris County, you can see this document up here on the top is the library's continuity of operations plan. Every department or division within Harris County has to create one of those, and they submit it to the county. And then the county overall has one of those as well. And it outlines, it's very detailed and identifies all of our mission essential functions. So climate controlled buildings for staff and public. We need to have electrical charging for staff and public, Wi-Fi connectivity, resources for referral. So some of those things, where you can have the printouts or QR codes or things for people to scan for the resources that they need. It also outlines recovery time objectives, dependencies. So what do we need? We need electrical power. We need air conditioning or heat. We need internet. We need access to the building or the roads clear. And all of these things, and then it identifies who's responsible for accomplishing them and who we need to work with to get them. So the power company, other agencies, other departments, library staff. So that makes communication for the county easier because they know who to reach out to on the library team. They know what we need, and they need to know who to contact for the questions that they need answered. And then the emergency plan and procedures document at the bottom is the one that I mentioned earlier that has the guidelines for how staff get activated just as the regular cooling site, and then how they deal with different emergencies like after a storm and all the other kinds of incidents that can happen. So communicating during and in the aftermath of a weather event can be challenging. If you've ever been in something like that where that the cell networks can be not reliable. During Hurricane Beryl in 2024, a friend and I were driving around trying to find even just data to get our phones to work, and because we didn't have power at home, so our Wi-Fi wasn't working at our homes. I'd gone to her house to use her generator, and so that gets confusing for staff. In the past, we've had emergency notifications through text messaging, and it hasn't always been very successful and hasn't been cohesive. And it hasn't worked super well for us. It's been problematic. After Hurricane Beryl, which was last summer, July of 2024, it was decided that going forward, we would use an old Teams channel that we had created during the early days of the pandemic. And we tried it out in the winter storm that we had this January, and it worked pretty well. We have one channel that's intended for emergency alerts to be sent to all staff, and nobody can make replies on that channel. They've disabled that functionality. That way it just comes from library leadership, and there's not a lot of other competing messages that make the main important messages get lost in the shuffle. And then after that, we also have one for managers and supervisors to use to communicate back to library leadership once they get into their buildings and say, I have power, I don't have power, the road's blocked, there's trees down, there's power but no internet, all the different, if there's damage to the building, all of that. And that helps library leadership to see a little bit faster which branches are ready to go and open up to serve the public as quickly as possible, because that's one of our goals, is to get back open as quickly as possible, because we know that people in the community are not going to have power, they're not going to have internet, they're going to be wanting to get in touch with their insurance companies and with roofers and all the different people that they need to reach out to file claims and get on the waiting list and all of that. So we want to be open so they can come in and use our Wi-Fi and our power and our air conditioning and have something to entertain their children. So we usually communicate our opening status via alerts on our website and our social media, because that's the most effective. And then, the branches that are open will put signs on their door, and they also share stuff in their branch social media for those that follow. And then we rely on word to spread from there. This is one of our Instagram posts from Hurricane Beryl in July of 2024. That's our Northwest branch there. And that's all the people that came in to take advantage of our services in the aftermath of that one. It was a pretty brutal one as far as power outages go. There was a lot of anger and animosity towards our electricity provider after that one, and they've been trying to communicate and make things better in the lead up to this past hurricane, or this hurricane season this year. But it was pretty brutal, widespread, longer than usual power outages, to the point where the lovely, wonderful people who came in from other states to help out were reporting people being angry at them, and it was very distressing. So we were glad we could help alleviate some of that burden. And so what can you do? There will be a lot of overlap here with some of the things that Jared shared. But definitely work with your local government and utility companies if you can, to have the library be a high priority for power restoration if in the event of a weather event situation. That's something that our library director has been working on. Make sure you have extra power strips to accommodate those who need to recharge devices, because you'll need them. Multiple types of charging cords and bricks if you can, as backup, because people may need more than what they brought, or they may have lost theirs, or may not be able to get to them. Snacks and water if at all possible. Setting up extra tables and chairs in meeting rooms in ways that people can kind of cluster, and then putting out games and coloring pages, Sudoku, crosswords. If you have puzzles, if you have a public viewing license, if you have a room where you can set up movies to play, especially maybe kids' movies, so the kids can watch them while their parents are working on things that they need to take care of next to them. And maybe it'll keep the kids occupied while they're working on that. Have on hand websites and contact details for local recovery agencies and nonprofits. Both ones that you can share online, or if you can have them printed out on handouts, or just paper that you can start writing them down on for people and handing them over, whatever works best. And then providing staff training on recognizing the signs of like heat stress and heat exhaustion, so that if somebody comes in and you think that they might be dealing with that, that you can reach out to emergency personnel to get them some help. I'm gonna see if I can play this video. Let's see if I can, I may have to stop sharing and reshare. Let's see. It's gonna play this. It's from, let's see, screen one. It's this one. Okay. Let's see if this works.
It's right after Hurricane Beryl, so we've lost power at the house. So today it's just actually quite a cool place. It's powered with computers and.
Oh wait, hang on.
I came here, of course, get out of the heat.
I keep forgetting to share the.
Also, because I'm going to work.
Let me get it to. Okay. All right. I keep forgetting to press the last share button when I need to share. So let me let this.
It's a good place to come. It's good.
Just got power back after Hurricane Beryl, and we're excited. Found out last night. Started texting all my staff, figuring out who will be here, what's going on, so we can get as many people here as possible to open at 10 a.m. And I'm so glad that Harris County supports us and supports us helping the community, providing community and wonderful place for free for anybody who wants.
Today it's right after Hurricane.
Just gonna play the first
Beryl,
part.
so we've lost power at the house. So today it's just actually quite a cool place. It's powered with computers and it's perfect.
I came here, of course, to get out of the heat like a lot of people, but also because I really need to work and didn't have any Wi-Fi at my house. So I'm working.
Oh, it's great. It's one is always quiet in this environment and sit
I think I already played that part. So, all right. So that's kind of an idea of how the community feels about the service that we provide. I wanted to share that. And so some of the challenges that we've encountered are that staffing can't, like I said, we can't open the whole branch. I'm just realizing what time it is. We often don't know. One of the biggest challenges for us is that we often don't know until late Thursday if we're being activated. So that makes it harder for us to communicate more widely about our open hours. It's hard to communicate to those who most need to know, who may not have access to things like social media or phones. And so they don't get those official alerts. So they may only see any signs that we have posted in our windows. Stress to the power grid that can cause power outages at the branch, like happened in the winter storm. And that's why we haven't typically been utilized as shelters. So some of the solutions that we're considering is more emergency training for our staff. The Homeland Security and Emergency Management team offers an intensive training. They told us about it right before summer reading started, so we had to say, let's pause that for now. But that is something that I want to look into offering some of our staff. It's kind of an intensive training. And then we're also doing a lot of work with our sustainability division. One of the things is that we are, in addition to working with them on the county's climate action plan that affects the whole county's internal operations, where we're trying to be more sustainable and cut our emissions and be more energy efficient. We're also in the second phase of a project that they have going on for distributed energy resources. And that's going to be solar panels, solar powered EV charging stations, and generators. And they've identified 2 to 3 of our branches. So the first phase, they've rolled out our community centers. The second phase will be some more community centers in 2 to 3 of our branches. And that increases our capability to be a more reliable cooling or warming center. I don't know what that means for us, as a potential shelter during a storm going into the future. But at least we know we should be able to get back up more quickly after an event. So those are some of the things that we have dealt with. And that's all I've got.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was really great. A lot of great tips and strategies in your presentation, as well as appreciate the stories that you shared with us about your experiences. So I'm sure, a lot of people, I definitely got a lot out of it. I'm sure our attendees did as well. So right now we'll open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions, you could drop it in the chat. Feel free to unmute and if you want to put on your camera, go for it and ask your question. We did have a question in the chat for Laura, asking about Microsoft Teams. Was it Microsoft Teams that the library used as an alternative to text messaging? Was it more reliable because of its dependence on Wi-Fi versus cellular towers?
It is Microsoft Teams that we use. And I think that is the reason why, I would have to ask our IT director has made the decision that it was more reliable. I need to pick his brain to find out if that's the reason for sure, but I think it did work better. At least partially because if you could get to one of our branches, or somebody that had Wi-Fi, you could see it. Whereas with the data and the texting, it was bizarre for Beryl. And usually texting works better than phone calls and things in those sorts of situations. But something with Hurricane Beryl last July just really messed with everything, and even that was really hard. The data was, like I said, that's what my friend and I were driving around just to get our data to work. We weren't even trying to find Wi-Fi. We were just trying to get messages to go through. So yes, I think that was his reasoning.
Excellent, thank you.
But I am happy to ask him for sure. If you want, feel free to email me and I'll ask him for sure.
Any other questions? Feel free to unmute or drop them in the chat. Comments as well.
I just wanted to add, Jared put some helpful
Yes.
grant information in the chat, and those were the two I had come up with. Also, we used to be able to get grants from the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, and I am not sure what the future of that is, but that has been a helpful source for any health related, and they consider, as both Jared and Laura explained so hopefully, that heat emergencies and cold emergencies are health emergencies. So, but I don't know what the prospects for that are. So let's keep our fingers crossed.
Excellent. Thank you, Margaret. Any other questions from anybody? We are about to wrap up, but if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, please feel free. All right. Well, I want to go ahead and thank our speakers for the presentations today. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Margaret. This was wonderful, very informative, and thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. We'll be sure to get the recording and the slides out to you all afterwards. And yes, everyone be well, and thanks again for joining us. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.